As the U.S. Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, officially designates Huawei and ZTE as national security threats, U.S. companies are banned from using government subsidies to purchase their equipment. FCC Commissioner Jeffrey Starks also wants quote-unquote untrustworthy equipment already installed replaced. As Trump administration efforts to convince other countries to block Huawei's 5G rollout continue, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he'll protect critical infrastructure from, quote, hostile state vendors. And in India, reports suggest telecom communications operators might be dissuaded from buying Huawei and ZTE products. How much will this cost? Who loses more? And will international cooperation on 5G be affected? Joining us from New York is Jack Perkowski, founder and managing partner of JFP Holdings. And from Beijing, Mr. Zhao Hai, research fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Mr. Zhao, this is nothing new, right? There has been, excuse me, Mr. Zhao, are you with us? Okay, why don't I go to you first, Mr. Perkowski. What do you make of this round of sanctions against Huawei and ZTE? What's new here?
Well, there's really nothing new. I mean, the battle with Huawei between Huawei and the United States has been going on for many years. So, Huawei first tried to get into the United States market in early 2000, and then soon after they get into a lawsuit with Cisco over IP. And I think since then it's been kind of a very tense relationship between Huawei and the United States and companies in the United States. And then, the action that was recently taken by the FCC was actually voted on last November. And so this is really just a confirmation of that. But this is, kind of, just another chapter in the long battle between Huawei and the United States.
All right, Mr. Zhao Hai, research fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Welcome back. What do you make of this round of sanctions, and especially the timing of FCC's announcement?
Yeah, just now, I think it's been said that this decision has been made since last November, and right now they're rolling out this final decision only because at this time the United States wants to show toughness against China because of the Hong Kong national security law. China just passed that law and started application of this law in Hong Kong, and the United States is trying to find any policy that can pressure China and to use it. But right now, I think even though after the consideration of many inconvenience in the United States, particularly rural carriers that will have problem if they dismantle the already installed Huawei equipment and no longer use that equipment, that will bring them difficulties. FCC disregard of that and only, continue to abuse the national security concept and to exclude Huawei and ZTE from their network. So I think this decision is very much political, and the use of national security as an excuse from the Chinese perspective is unacceptable. And if that's true, then any company that related to U.S. government or military is problematic, and the world, other countries in the world should reconsider their use of their technology. So this is really a lose-lose situation for both countries if they continue down this path.
Well, you talk about U.S. rural carriers that rely heavily on Huawei equipment. There has been a hearing asking for their advice whether or not the U.S. authorities should go ahead punishing Huawei. What do you think will be the impact on those American rural carriers and residents? Mr. Zhao?
As we know, major American telecom carriers do not use Huawei and ZTE in particular, and only because the price advantage of Huawei and ZTE has been used by rural carriers. And right now, at this point, that the U.S. is experiencing very high volume of coronavirus infections, and the rural carriers need a reliable network for them to continue to fight back against the coronavirus. So at this critical juncture, it's very problematic to hear that FCC wants to push down this decision to those carriers. And because those carriers still use Huawei, and Huawei actually quite reliable in terms of carrying all those telecom communications in those areas. So I think that's why they're worried, and they think this sudden decision is very much unacceptable.
Mr. Perkowski, how do you look at this? How do you see this ban, this sanction impacting U.S. companies as well as U.S. consumers?
Well, I think the first thing to mention is the fact that a country's telecommunications network is a very strategic kind of consideration, which does have a lot of security concerns. And so I think that the United States is clearly taking a position that we really cannot have equipment where you might have backdoors, where information from the United States can then, get back to other parties. So I think there are very real national security issues at stake here, and this is not something new. This is, something that's been around for a long time, and this is a concern that the U.S. has had. Now, clearly, to the extent that they can't buy Huawei equipment, Huawei is probably the most advanced of all of the 5G companies, and they've spent a tremendous amount of money developing the technology, and they also have a big cost advantage. So to the extent that U.S. companies cannot use that equipment, that's clearly going to cost more, and they may not have available the best technology. But that's what we have to wait and see.
Mr. Perkowski, FCC Chairman Mr. Pai said that the decision is, quote, based on the overwhelming weight of evidence, but he did not list what those evidence was. What do you make of this? Is there concrete evidence that Huawei and ZTE truly threaten American national security the way Washington and those China hawks, Washington politicians claim that to be?
Of course, I'm not privy to what our intelligence departments know, but the United States maintains that they have evidence that there were backdoors in the 4G equipment going back to 2009, and they have not chosen to make that public. In fact, it was only really last year that they disclosed that intelligence to both the UK and Germany. So, the U.S. certainly believes that they have reason to be concerned, but I have no way of judging that. I take them at their word.
Well, Mr. Zhao, what do you think? What would be the ripple effect? Because think about China Telecom, along with other Chinese telecommunications companies that have already been put on the sanctions list by the Trump administration.
Yeah, first of all, I think if the U.S. really had any evidence against the Huawei and ZTE in terms of what really happened, they would have presented it already. And so far, whatever being asked, Secretary Pompeo, Secretary of State Pompeo, or FCC Chairman Pai and all the commissioners, they repeat one thing, again and again, that is saying it's related to national security. So that means, really, to my mind, there's no real evidence against those companies saying that there's a real threat, only potential, only possible threat. So they always use would happen to the U.S. infrastructure. Overall, I think the impact to both the U.S. telecommunication network and also China's telecommunication network and also around the globe, the U.S. action will slow down the development of 5G network globally and also will slow down future technology developments around the world because now they're disrupting U.S.-China cooperation on technology development, and also they're saying that you need to divide the future technology into two different systems and using two different standards. Otherwise, the U.S. will not accept anything that has any Chinese components, which is really unthinkable in today's world, whereas we have a very globalized and very integrated global supply chain and also research connectivities. So I think the impact will be grave, again, if the U.S. continue to pursue this very selfish and very stringent national security concept and apply this to all over, everything that related to, using everything in terms of national security, particularly the telecommunication infrastructure, because there are ways, there are solutions that we know can try to solve this problem, and Huawei presented those possible solutions to the U.S. government. Because of ideological reasons, the U.S. won't accept that, and other countries also saw that potential solutions, but because of U.S. pressure, so far no other countries, particularly U.S. allies, would dare to stand up against the U.S. pressure And that's why I think it's quite possible that the U.S. will continue this path and cut the connections between Huawei, ZTE, Chinese companies with U.S. markets.
Right. Mr. Perkowski, talking about other countries' reactions, whether or not they will bow to the Washington's pressure, how do you think this FCC sanction against Huawei and ZTE will impact other countries and their decisions on whether or not they will use Huawei and also Huawei's 5G networks? For example, India, the UK, and the European Union.
Well, it's clear that it's clear that the United States government has been using all of its different levers to try to pressure other countries not to use the Huawei equipment and to go along with the United States. And I guess depending upon what each country's relationship is with the United States and to the extent to which they're dependent upon the United States for either economically or some other reason, then they will either go along with the U.S. or not. Now, so far the results have been a little bit mixed. The UK has agreed to kind of a half-in, half-out strategy where where they will allow the Huawei equipment to be used in certain parts of the of their networks. Now, whether or not that stands, I know there's a lot of pushback from the Conservative Party in the UK. Whether that stands, that remains to be seen. The big issue is Germany, because Germany is a big part of the European economy, which is Huawei's second biggest market. I mean, Huawei, basically their biggest market is of course China, but their second largest is Europe. So I think a lot hinges on what what Germany decides to do. Meanwhile, countries like Australia, Japan, and so forth have agreed to go along with the U.S. position. So I think it's going to be mixed, depending upon the relationship.
Right. You talk about the UK and their reaction.
Countries.
Actually, I want to quote you this. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said that I'm not going to get drawn into xenophobia because I'm not a xenophobe. But he also said that I do want to see our critical national infrastructure properly protected from hostile state vendors. Well, mixed signals right there. I want to thank both of our guests, Mr. Jack Perkowski and Mr. Zhao Hai. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, the world's first coronavirus vaccine will be used for a year on Chinese troops. Is this still a test, or are we now on the verge of a viable vaccine?